Know your place. Summer 2013, Meridian Capital occupied floors 40 through 45 of Manhattan's Sterling Tower. It was the kind of investment firm where interns fetched coffee, wore cheap suits, and dreamed of one day having an office with a view. Jasmine Brooks was one of 12 summer interns. 21 years old, economics degree from Howard University, 4.0 GPA, hunger to prove herself in a world that rarely welcomed people who looked like her. The internship was unpaid. She worked nights at a grocery store to afford her sublet in Queens. She commuted 2 hours each way. She arrived first, left last, and studied financial models until 2 a.m., and Richard Hartwell, CEO of Meridian Capital, noticed her for all the wrong reasons. "Jasmine," his voice boomed across the 43rd floor trading room. "Coffee, black, 2 sugars, and make it quick. I have the Steinberg meeting in 10 minutes. It was 9 a.m. Jasmine had been at her desk since 7, working on the market analysis that was due at noon. She looked up to see Richard standing by his office, not even looking at her, just expecting obedience. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm actually in the middle of... I don't recall asking if you were busy. I asked for coffee." Now he looked at her, his expression making clear that questioning him was a mistake. Is there a problem? Every head in the trading room turned. The other interns, mostly white, mostly male, mostly from families with connections, watched with barely concealed relief that they weren't the target. "No, sir. I'll get your coffee." Jasmine saved her work and headed to the break room, cheeks burning. Behind her, she heard Richard tell one of the analysts, "That's why I don't understand this push for diversity hires. Some people just aren't cut out for high-pressure environments." The words hit like a physical blow. Diversity hire. As if her 4.0 GPA, her scholarship, her acceptance to this competitive program meant nothing. As if she was here to fill a quota rather than earn a place. She made the coffee exactly as requested and delivered it to Richard's office. "Took you long enough." He didn't look up from his Bloomberg terminal. "Close the door on your way out." That was day 3 of her internship. Day 7, Richard stopped her in the hallway. "Jasmine, I need you to make copies of this presentation. 200 pages, bound, delivered to conference room A by 2 p.m. "Sir, I'm scheduled to shadow the derivatives team at 2. Were you scheduled? I'm assigning you to this instead." He thrust the document at her. "Unless you think making copies is beneath you." "No, sir." She spent 3 hours at the copy machine while other interns sat in on high-level meetings, networked with executives, and built the connections that would launch their careers. Day 12, Richard assigned her to reorganize the file room. A full day of alphabetizing documents that hadn't been touched in years, while her cohort attended a lunch with potential clients. The pattern continued. Coffee runs, copy jobs, administrative tasks that had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with keeping her away from opportunities. The other interns noticed. Some looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few, emboldened by Richard's treatment, started making their own demands. "Jasmine, can you grab me a coffee while you're getting Mr. Hartwell's? Jasmine, these files need organizing. Jasmine, take notes at this meeting. But don't speak. Don't ask questions. Don't remind us you're supposed to be learning, not serving." 6 weeks into the program, interns gave presentations to the executive team. Jasmine had worked for months on hers, a detailed analysis of emerging markets in African tech sectors. She'd identified 3 companies poised for exponential growth, backed by data and projections that showed her understanding of complex financial modeling. She was the last to present. By then, Richard was checking his phone, barely paying attention. Jasmine presented anyway. She walked through her analysis, highlighted the opportunities, explained her reasoning with clarity and confidence. When she finished, Richard looked up. "Interesting. Very enthusiastic." The word dripped with condescension. "But," he continued, "I think you're a bit out of your depth here. African tech? These are emerging, unstable markets. This firm focuses on established, reliable investments. We leave the experimental approaches to firms with less to lose. Sir, with respect, the data shows you did a lot of research. Good work ethic, I'll give you that. But financial analysis requires more than work ethic. It requires instinct, judgment, understanding of how markets really work. Those are things that come from experience and he paused. Breeding. Breeding. The word hung in the air. Some people are born understanding how capital moves, Richard continued. They grow up around it, absorb it, develop intuitions that can't be taught. Others, well, they can learn the mechanics, do the grunt work, but they'll never have that deeper insight. He smiled, not unkindly, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a slow student. Jasmine, you're clearly smart. You work hard. Those are valuable traits, but they're valuable in the right context. You'd probably do very well in a role that utilizes your strengths. HR, maybe, or community outreach. But high-level investment strategy? He shook his head. That requires a certain pedigree. The other executives shifted uncomfortably. One started to speak. Richard, I actually thought the African tech analysis had some merit, which is why you're VP and I'm CEO. Richard cut him off. I know talent when I see it, and I know when someone is trying to punch above their weight class. He turned back to Jasmine. Here's my advice for you. Find your lane. Focus on what you're naturally suited for. Not everyone can be in the C-suite. Most people serve crucial support roles. There's no shame in that. Some people are born to lead. Others are born to serve. The sooner you accept which category you fall into, the happier you'll be. Jasmine stood there, 12 sets of eyes on her carefully researched presentation dismissed, her potential categorized by breeding and pedigree, code words for the fact that she was black from a working-class family, without the connections that opened doors for people like Richard. Thank you for your feedback, Mr. Hartwell. Her voice was steady. Her face was calm. Inside, she was crumbling. That night, back in her Queens sublet, Jasmine cried. Not from sadness, from rage. Pure, molten rage at a system designed to keep people like her in support roles, while mediocre men with family money made decisions about billions of dollars. She looked at her African tech analysis. The one Richard had dismissed. She'd identified 3 companies. She believed in her research, in her instincts, in her analysis. Richard Hartwell had billions of dollars and decades of experience, but Jasmine had something he'd never have: hunger, desperation, the absolute certainty that she had no safety net, no family connections, no path forward except the one she built herself. She opened her laptop and started a new document. Not a presentation, a plan. If Richard Hartwell's firm wouldn't invest in African tech, she would. She had $3,000 in savings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next 10 years, Jasmine Brooks would turn that $3,000 into $2.4 billion. She would build one of the most successful venture capital firms in the world. And those 3 African tech companies she'd identified in her intern presentation, she'd invest in all of them. They'd all become unicorns. And Meridian Capital, Richard Hartwell's firm, would make a series of catastrophic investment decisions. They'd miss every major tech trend. They'd bleed clients, talent, and reputation. By 2023, they'd be hemorrhaging money, desperate for a buyer. Jasmine would make them an offer, not because she needed the company, but because Richard Hartwell needed to learn a lesson about breeding, pedigree, and who was born to lead versus who was born to serve. The intern he'd sent for coffee was coming back as his owner, and she had no intention of being kind. The final week of her internship, Richard called Jasmine to his office. She thought perhaps he'd reconsidered his dismissal of her presentation, that maybe he'd seen value in her work. Instead, he handed her an evaluation form. You're a hard worker, Jasmine. Punctual, reliable, good attitude despite the demanding tasks we gave you. I'm rating you satisfactory for the program. Satisfactory. While other interns who'd done half the work and a quarter of the analysis received outstanding and exceptional. I'm also not recommending you for a full-time position, Richard continued. You're just not the right fit for Meridian's culture. But I'll write you a decent recommendation for administrative positions elsewhere. You have good organizational skills. Jasmine took the evaluation. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Hartwell. I learned a great deal this summer. That was true." She'd learned exactly what kind of man Richard Hartwell was. She'd learned how easily power could be wielded as a weapon. She'd learned that in rooms filled with wealthy white men, she'd always be seen as a diversity hire, a coffee fetcher, someone born to serve. And she'd learned that the only way to change that wasn't to convince them she belonged at their table. It was to buy the table, burn it down, and build her own. August 2013. Jasmine Brooks left Meridian Capital with $3,000 in savings, a dismissed business plan, and unshakable conviction. The three companies she'd identified in her intern presentation, TechHub Lagos, Pisa expansion partner SafariPay, and solar startup SunReach Africa, were exactly the kind of unstable, experimental investments Richard Hartwell had mocked. Jasmine believed in them anyway. She couldn't afford traditional venture capital minimums, but she found another way. She contacted each company directly, offered to work as an unpaid consultant in exchange for small equity stakes. They laughed at first. What could a 21-year-old offer? Market analysis, financial modeling, U.S. investor connections, she told them. I'll work for free for 6 months. If I don't deliver value, you owe me nothing. If I do, I get 0.5% equity. Two agreed. The third countered with 0.3%. Jasmine accepted all of them. For the next year, she worked 3 jobs, morning shifts at Starbucks, afternoon hours doing bookkeeping for small businesses, and nights consulting for her African startups via video calls. She slept 4 hours a night. Shahid lived on ramen and coffee. She had no social life, no luxuries, no safety net. She also had total clarity of purpose. By 2015, TechHub Lagos secured Series A funding. Jasmine's 0.5% was suddenly worth $40,000. She immediately rolled it into SafariPay's expansion round and M-Pisa negotiations. By 2016, SafariPay partnered with 3 major banks. Jasmine's combined stakes were worth $300,000. She quit her side jobs and went full-time into venture capital. She founded Brooks Ventures with a single thesis: invest in overlooked founders, building solutions for overlooked markets. Women, people of color, companies in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, the places traditional VCs ignored. Emerging markets are too risky, investors told her, the same thing Richard had said. Jasmine smiled politely and proved them wrong. By 2017, she'd invested in 12 companies. 9 succeeded. Her $300,000 became $4 million. By 2018, her $4 million became $20 million. TechHub Lagos went public. Jasmine's original 0.5% stake was worth $8 million alone. The tech press noticed. "Who is Jasmine Brooks?" asked TechCrunch. "The VC who sees what others miss." Forbes profiled her in 2019. At 27, Jasmine Brooks has one of the highest success rates in venture capital. Her secret? She invests in founders who look like her and markets that traditional VCs dismiss, and she's making a fortune doing it. By 2020, Brooks Ventures managed $200 million. Jasmine had a team of analysts, an office in Brooklyn, and a reputation as one of the sharpest investors in early-stage tech. COVID devastated many VCs. Jasmine thrived. While others panicked, she doubled down on digital infrastructure in developing markets: telemedicine in Kenya, e-learning in Nigeria, fintech in Brazil. Every investment she made echoed the analysis Richard Hartwell had dismissed in 2013. Every success proved that his instinct and breeding mattered less than actual analysis and courage. By 2021, Brooks Ventures was managing $800 million. Jasmine's personal net worth hit $400 million. She was 29 years old. By 2023, her fund crossed $2 billion. Her personal wealth reached $2.4 billion, making her one of the youngest black female billionaires in America. She bought a penthouse in Manhattan, not because she needed the space, but because it was in Sterling Tower. Floor 48, 3 floors above Meridian Capital. Every morning, riding the elevator down past floor 43, Jasmine remembered. The coffee runs, the copy room, Richard's voice explaining that some people were born to serve. She also tracked Meridian Capital's decline. The firm had missed every major investment trend of the past decade. They'd passed on early Facebook rounds, ignored cryptocurrency, dismissed Southeast Asian e-commerce, and laughed at African tech, the same sectors Jasmine had built her fortune on. By 2020, Meridian was struggling. By 2022, they'd lost 3 major clients and half their staff. By early 2023, they were in crisis. Bad investments, regulatory issues, a sexual harassment scandal involving 2 senior partners. Richard Hartwell, now 58, watched his empire crumble. The firm his father had founded, that he'd inherited and expanded, was failing under his leadership. In March 2023, Meridian's board made a decision: sell the firm or face bankruptcy. They put out quiet feelers. Most buyers weren't interested. Meridian's reputation was too damaged, their portfolio too troubled. But one potential buyer emerged. Brooks Ventures submitted an acquisition offer, $400 million for full ownership, all assets, and immediate operational control. The board was desperate enough to consider it. They scheduled a meeting with the potential buyer for April 15, 2023. Richard didn't connect the dots. Brooks Ventures meant nothing to him. He didn't follow the VC world closely anymore, too busy trying to save his sinking ship. His assistant had mentioned the buyer was a young woman who made her money in emerging markets. But Richard was focused on the number. $400 million was enough to pay debts, satisfy investors, and let him walk away with some dignity intact. The morning of the meeting, Richard prepared his presentation. He'd positioned Meridian as a legacy firm with strong fundamentals, temporarily set back by market conditions. He'd emphasized their traditional values and established reputation. He still believed breeding and pedigree mattered. He still believed the old ways were the right ways. He had no idea that the 21-year-old intern he'd sent for coffee was about to walk into his conference room as a billionaire buyer. At 10 a.m., Richard's assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Hartwell, the Brooks Ventures team is here." "Good. Show them to conference room A. I'll be right there." Richard grabbed his presentation folder, straightened his tie, and headed down the hall. He'd done hundreds of these meetings. He knew how to handle buyers, flatter them, sell the vision, close the deal. He opened the conference room door. Jasmine Brooks sat at the head of the table. The recognition was instant and devastating. Richard's face went from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. "Hello, Mr. Hartwell." Jasmine's voice was calm, professional, with an edge of ice. "It's been 10 years. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Richard stood frozen in the doorway. His board members, 4 men and 1 woman, all looking uncomfortable, sat along the sides of the table. Jasmine's 2 attorneys sat beside her, folders open, pens ready. "You," Richard's voice came out as a whisper. "You're Brooks Ventures?" "I am Brooks Ventures, founder and CEO." Jasmine gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit. We have a lot to discuss about the future of your company." She smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Or should I say, my company? Because that's what it's about to become. Richard sat heavily, his carefully prepared presentation forgotten. He stared at the woman he'd dismissed as a diversity hire, who he'd sent for coffee, who he'd told to find her lane. She'd found her lane. It led straight through his company and out the other side. And now she was going to teach him exactly what happened when you underestimated someone because of their breeding. The lesson was going to be expensive, humiliating, and absolutely unforgettable. Jasmine opened her folder. "Shall we begin? I have an offer to present. I think you'll find the terms educational." Behind her, through the window, Manhattan stretched out below. Somewhere in that city, 12 summer interns were probably fetching coffee, making copies, being dismissed by powerful men who couldn't see their potential. Jasmine hoped at least one of them was taking notes, because in 10 years, one of them might be sitting in a conference room just like this one, teaching their own lesson about underestimation, prejudice, and the price of arrogance. The lesson Jasmine was about to deliver to Richard Hartwell would be perfect preparation. Richard finally found his voice. "Jasmine, Ms. Brooks, I don't understand. You were an intern. How did you—" Build a $2 billion venture capital firm, Jasmine finished for him. I did exactly what you told me not to do. I invested in those unstable, experimental African tech companies from my presentation. Remember? The one you dismissed because I lacked breeding and pedigree? She pulled out a document, his evaluation from 2013. She'd kept it all these years. You rated me satisfactory. Said I wasn't the right fit for Meridian's culture. Recommended me for administrative positions. Jasmine slid the paper across the table. Those 3 companies you called too risky? TechHub Lagos IPO'd at $4 billion. SafariPay was acquired by Visa for $1.2 billion. SunReach Africa is valued at $800 million. Combined, they're worth more than your entire firm ever was. One of the board members, Susan Chen, spoke carefully. Ms. Brooks, your track record is impressive. We're genuinely interested in your acquisition offer. Good. Because here's what I'm offering. Jasmine opened her laptop, projected her presentation on the screen. I'll purchase Meridian Capital for $400 million. That's generous considering your actual value is closer to $280 million once we account for your toxic assets and pending lawsuits. Richard flinched. She knew about the lawsuits. In exchange, all current executives will be terminated immediately. That includes you, Mr. Hartwell. No golden parachute, no consulting contract, no advisory role. You'll leave with what the employment contracts legally require and nothing more. You can't, Richard started. I can. And I will. Jasmine's voice was steel. Meridian Capital will be dissolved. The name, the legacy, everything your father built and you inherited, gone. I'm not buying your firm to continue it. I'm buying it to erase it. The board members exchanged glances. Susan Chen spoke again. Ms. Brooks, we understand there's history here, but surely we can find a transition arrangement that preserves what? The culture that sends talented people for coffee while promoting mediocre men with the right last names? The instinct that missed every major investment opportunity of the last decade? Jasmine leaned forward. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to acquire a failed firm at a fair price. You have 48 hours to accept or I walk, and you can explain to your creditors why you let the only buyer disappear. Richard's hands were shaking. This is personal. This is revenge. This is business, Jasmine corrected. You taught me that, remember? When you explained that some people are born to lead and others are born to serve? When you dismissed my analysis because I lacked the right breeding? She stood, gathering her materials. You were right about one thing, Mr. Hartwell. Some people are born with advantages, wealth, connections, opportunities handed to them, but those advantages don't make you smart. They don't make you competent. They just make you comfortable. She walked toward the door, then paused. I'm giving you 48 hours. Sign the deal, take the $400 million, and leave quietly. Or refuse. Watch Meridian declare bankruptcy and leave with nothing. Jasmine looked directly at Richard. Either way, the intern you sent for coffee is now the woman who decides whether you leave with dignity or disgrace. That's not revenge, Mr. Hartwell. That's just the market correcting a decade-old mistake. She left the conference room, her attorneys following. Behind her, Richard Hartwell sat in ruins, finally understanding that breeding and pedigree meant nothing when you were sitting across from someone who'd outworked, outthought, and outperformed you in every possible way. The coffee-fetching intern had become a billionaire, and the CEO who'd dismissed her was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. 47 hours later, Richard Hartwell signed the acquisition agreement. The press release went out May 1st, 2023. Brooks Ventures acquires Meridian Capital in $400 million deal. Founder Jasmine Brooks returns to firm where she interned, this time as owner. The business press devoured it. Every article mentioned Richard's treatment of Jasmine, the coffee runs, the breeding comment. Reporters found other former employees with similar stories. Richard's reputation was destroyed completely. On May 15th, Jasmine called a mandatory all-hands meeting at Meridian Capital. Every employee was required to attend. Richard, too, technically still employed until the official transition date. Jasmine stood at the front of the same conference room where she'd presented her intern analysis a decade earlier. I'm Jasmine Brooks, your new owner. Some of you remember me from 2013 when I interned here. Uncomfortable shifts from older employees. During that internship, I was treated as support staff. I fetched coffee, made copies, tasks designed to keep me from actual learning. When I presented an investment analysis, it was dismissed. The CEO told me I lacked the breeding and pedigree for high-level strategy. Jasmine pulled up her original 2013 presentation. These were the 3 companies I identified: TechHub Lagos, SafariPay, and SunReach Africa. Combined current valuation, $6.4 billion. I invested my $3,000 in savings into them. That investment is now worth $240 million. Gasps. Richard stared at the floor. Meanwhile, Meridian's portfolio lost 40% of its value. You missed cryptocurrency, Southeast Asian e-commerce, renewable energy, every major trend. She clicked to the next slide showing performance comparisons. Meridian Capital will be dissolved. The name will disappear. This office becomes Brooks Ventures, New York. Some of you will be offered positions. Many will not. Panic rippled through the room. But first, I want to talk about why this firm failed. It wasn't just bad investments. It was culture, leadership, values. She looked directly at Richard. Mr. Hartwell built a firm that valued pedigree over performance. That worked when finance was a closed club. But the world changed, and this firm didn't. New slide, diversity statistics. In 2013, Meridian's investment team was 94% white, 89% male. Today, it's 91% white, 86% male. Brooks Ventures is 60% women, 70% people of color, and our returns are triple yours. She continued. Here's the lesson Mr. Hartwell is learning today. When you dismiss talented people because they don't have the right breeding, you don't just lose their contribution, you lose to them. They build competing firms and eventually buy you out. Richard stood suddenly. I don't have to listen to this. Yes, you do. Jasmine's voice was ice. Per the acquisition agreement, you're employed until May 31st. You will attend all transition meetings. You will watch the dismantling of Meridian Capital. That's the price of my $400 million. Richard sat back down, humiliated. For the rest of you, Jasmine continued, we're evaluating every employee. If you've been successful because of merit, you'll have opportunities. If you've been successful because of who you know, you won't. Final slide, open positions. We're hiring 40 new analysts, starting salary $150,000 plus equity. We want talent from everywhere. Howard, Spelman, state schools, non-traditional paths. If you're excellent and hungry, we want you. After the meeting, employees lined up to speak with HR. Richard left without speaking to anyone. 3 days later, he requested a meeting with Jasmine. They met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. Richard looked older, diminished. I wanted to apologize, he began, for how I treated you. What I said. It was wrong. Jasmine sipped her coffee, the same order Richard had once demanded she fetch. You're apologizing because I won. If I'd failed, if I'd stayed a coffee fetcher, would you still think you were wrong? Richard was quiet. Probably not. And that's the real problem, isn't it? At least you're honest. Can I ask you something? Richard looked at his coffee. Did you buy Meridian just for revenge? Both, Jasmine answered. Revenge would have been letting you go bankrupt. Business was recognizing that your infrastructure has value if used correctly. I bought it to build something better on top of your failure. She stood to leave. You asked if this was revenge. It wasn't. Revenge would have been destroying you personally. What I did was correct a market failure. You had power you didn't earn and couldn't wield effectively. I took that power and redistributed it. That's not revenge, Mr. Hartwell. That's capitalism working the way it's supposed to. Will I ever work in finance again? That's up to you. If you genuinely learn, there's room for redemption. But it requires humility. You'd have to start over, prove yourself the way I did. No shortcuts, just work and results. I don't know if I can. Then you won't work in finance again. Jasmine headed for the door. By the way, I need someone to organize files in our new office. Alphabetize documents, make copies. I hear you have experience managing support staff. Richard's face went red. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. I deserve that. Yes, you did. Jasmine walked out, leaving Richard with his thoughts. 6 months later, Brooks Ventures New York was thriving. The office where Jasmine had once fetched coffee now housed 40 analysts and a mentorship program serving 200 students annually. The Meridian Capital name was gone. Richard Hartwell had taken a job at a nonprofit teaching financial literacy to underserved communities. He showed up every day at $60,000 a year, apparently trying to become the person he should have been. Jasmine didn't follow his journey. She had her own work, building a firm that proved talent had nothing to do with breeding or pedigree. On the anniversary of Meridian's acquisition, a reporter asked if she felt vindicated. Vindication isn't the point, she replied. The point is changing the system. Every talented kid who gets dismissed needs to know they can win anyway. Not by asking permission, but by building something undeniable. What would you say to your 21-year-old self? Keep taking notes. Remember every dismissal, not for revenge, but because those moments teach you exactly what kind of leader you never want to be. And what would you say to Richard Hartwell now? Nothing. I've already said everything he needed to hear. Whether he learned is his problem now, not mine. Jasmine returned to her office, the one with the view, the one she'd earned through talent and refusing to accept anyone's limitations. On her desk sat a framed document, her 2013 intern evaluation rated satisfactory. She kept it as a reminder, not of revenge, but of proof. Richard Hartwell had been wrong about which category she belonged to, and that $400 million lesson would echo through finance for decades.